This is Larry, and in this video I'm going to show you how to build and set up this filament roller for your Prusa MK2 or MK3 so that you can change filament rolls quickly and easily. You can find the designs for this filament roller on Thingaverse, and I will leave the links in the description. Okay, in this video I'm going to go over how to put together my bearing spool holder that goes on top of the Prusa printers. I have a Mark II, but this obviously worked for the Mark III. You can find my design on Thingaverse. I'll leave a link in the description. But this is just a quick how to put this together. Now, I'll probably have two different versions of it on Thingaverse. One is a version that uses screws like this to hold it all together. Then I have another version that doesn't use screws and basically just goes together like this, where you basically just heat up the material and the bearings just press in there with little plastic inserts. But it doesn't seem to roll nearly as well for that version, so I prefer the version that has the screws. And these are 5mm screws that go in there. Here I used hex screws, but I ran out of hex screws, so I'm just going to use regular pan head Phillips head screws. See, these are 5mm. And that's what you need to, and you get these at Lowe's, 5mm screws. And because the holes that are in here are 4.5 and they're made to match up pretty good to these 5mm screws. So I'll just go through how to put it together. As you can see, in this one is a little bit shorter than this frame. I actually have changed it by 20mm. I've been using this for a few prints and it seems to roll pretty good, but it seems a little bit less stable, so I widened the frame, and that's why I have this one. The other thing is that when I printed, I mirrored, so I have the two different sides. They're not the same. Obviously, I just put them on the print bed and mirrored one, so it flipped it around. The reason I have it like this, because it'll print really nice and easy. I actually wanted to do it where it was directly in the middle, but that would make it difficult to print, so this is the way I'm going to do it. Okay, so I'll show how to put together one of these. So the three parts you need to print, obviously the frame, you have to print with supports in here to make this hold up really well. It's a little pain in the ass to get the supports, but let me zoom in here. But you can see that even with the supports, I mean, it came out really good. I mean, it came out, the finished product, even with supports, after I pulled the supports out, it came out really nice and clean. So you just got to make sure you clean that out really well, because these spacers right here are what keep the bearing from rubbing up against the side. Rubbing up against the side of the frame, because you want to have as little friction as possible. So the other thing you need besides the 5mm screws, let me zoom back out here. The other thing you need beside the 5mm screws is you're going to need these type of bearings, and these are 688 bearings. They are 5mm wide. They are 16mm in diameter, and the outer diameter, and the inner diameter is 8mm. For this project, this is what you're going to need. A lot of people just use skateboard bearings because they're plentiful, they're easy to get. If you just look up 688 bearings, you can find them online, and they're pretty easy to find. And they're cheap too. I mean, super cheap. I think I got a whole sleeve of bearings here for, I don't know, 10 bucks or something like that. So for this, obviously, you're going to need, to make two of these, you're going to need, in my design, you're going to need 4 bearings per frame. So one goes on each side of this wheel. So let me start putting it together. So the first thing you have to do is start pressing the bearings inside the sleeves. And they press in pretty firmly, make it nice and snug. So you have to start pressing bearings into each one of those. And I'll probably fast forward through this section. One. Oops, my little space. As I'm fast forwarding here, I'll just go over that the tolerances for these little pulleys are very, very tight for these bearings to fit in there. And I wanted them tight so that you had a really good motion on the bearing. The problem is you have to really push hard to get these bearings to seat inside the pulleys. So you might have to use the end of a screwdriver or a mallet or something like that to get them to fit. If you don't, they might bind a little bit inside the pulley frames. Obviously, I printed all this stuff on my Prusa Mark II. So the other thing you have to print with supports are these. To make these come out clean, I used 0.20, but I did layer editing to make sure that this came out really smooth. Let me zoom into this again here real quick. So you can see in here that there's a little bit of cleanup I still need to do on these. I didn't go crazy cleaning them up. On these ones, I actually went and polished them with like sandpaper, and I used my Dremel. I used the Dremel drum like this and kind of cleaned it up, made sure it was really smooth. But it doesn't seem to really make a difference. So so that's there. So I got the 4 bearings in my pulleys ready to go. So now we're going to get ready to back out again here. Okay. And now we're going to, I'm going to thread these with a driver. So what I do is I just take the screw, and actually I'm just going to use this small one, just because it's easier to hold on a hex bit on there. And I'm just going to use a power driver and just quickly thread these in, pre-thread them. Now as I fast forward through threading these in there, it just makes it a lot easier when it comes to assembling the frames later on. If you use a power driver, it kind of almost melts the PLA a little bit and kind of creates threads, so that later on when you're tightening the bearings and the pulleys into the frames, it goes together so much better. So you can see in there, it actually has created some threads in there. It just makes it easier. I actually have both of these at 4.5 on both sides. It just makes it much more rigid if it's actually threaded on both sides. Okay, so let me back out again here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and install the pulleys. The other piece you need are these little spacers. It was hard to get these just right to where a 5mm screw would go in there, but not too loosely, because I wanted it nice and snug. And then I wanted this to be able to fit inside the bearing without having any play, but nice and snug. So I had to really play around with that to get it just right. So basically it's this little 8mm spacer with a 5mm inner diameter that goes in between them. So what you do is you pop your bearing in there, and so this could be a little bit of a snug because this plastic part is just a little wider than these spacers in here. Let me zoom in again. White might not have been the best color to show on video for this. And basically it's going to spread that apart just a little bit to get that in, and then pop that in there, and you can see that it kind of pops in there like that. Okay, so then you want to take your screw, put your screw in there. Now I've got to switch bits here because and you just use a power driver. These screws are obviously too long, but I forgot to get another set of hex screws that were just the right size. So wait till I get close to the other side, and I usually back it up, and then I go down and I actually press down while I'm drilling it in to make sure that it doesn't create a gap. So when it comes through the other side, it doesn't spread. See how it's starting to spread it a little bit? I don't really want that. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to press down again. There we go. Like I said, this is not the ideal screw for this because they're a little long, but really what you need is a 5mm by 22mm long, and you can see that just rolls so nice and smooth now. With the spacer in there, no matter how tight you put it, you're not going to put any pressure on the bearing. We want this to float as freely as possible. So right now, these are brand new bearings, and they actually slide really nice and smooth. So let's do one more, so you can kind of see how that all goes together again. Again, you take the bearing, put your spacer in there. Spacer fits in there nice and snug. Take your screw, make sure it slides in. Again, you got to spread this apart a little bit with your fingers just to try to get that in there. Good. Get that in there so it's like that. You can see it does spread it just a little bit, but that's fine. And then we're going to put our screw in here. Did I pre-thread that? I'm not sure if I did or not. Okay, then we take our screw. And we're going to put this in here. to put it down on the table. Might press down really hard so that it starts to bite into that side and doesn't spread it apart. And it shouldn't. Okay, good. Second arm together. I've already pre-threaded these holes. Okay, I'm going to fast forward through the building of the second frame, but you go through the same steps you did for the first frame. Just make sure that you press the bearings fully into the pulleys before you install them, and then thread them onto the frames. Now, you also might want to make sure that you put the screws through the correct side, depending on how you're going to mount them on your frame, but think about that before you put the screws in. After we build the second frame, I'll go through mounting the frame onto the printer. So the orientation that'll go up on the printer will be like this. They'll go like that, and then in this design, because obviously there's different spool widths, you can just clamp them onto your Prusa in whatever width you need for that spool. I'm going to put a couple of these on my Prusa. So I have some narrow spools, and I have some that are a little wider. Okay, so here's a wider spool, so that one obviously would go like this. It's, you know, a wider spool like that, and they fit on there really nice. Let's do it from the side. You can see that it'll just roll like that. Okay, and so for this width, you just slide it on your rails to fit, and then for narrower ones, obviously, you can accommodate narrow ones also. Same thing, you could actually accommodate a very narrow spool with this. So basically that's how it works, just like that, and they'll go up on your frame like that, and that's it. Okay, now we're going to show actually putting on the rails, the bearing rails on the Prusa Mark III. Sorry, I keep saying that, Mark II. And they go on just like the stock ones that came with your Prusa. They just kind of go on the top and clip on. So we're going to go ahead. It's a little bit beefier design, but basically the same way. You just pop that on there, and then you just push down really firmly, and pop them in. Sometimes it takes a little more work. I should have trimmed around that a little bit better. So what I do before I go ahead and put a spool on is I kind of measure, you know, where I'm going to want that spool. So approximately like right there. I think that'll be good. If I was smart, I'd actually measure this out, but I don't think I need to. Just take that, pop that on there like that, and line it up. And they don't have to be exact. You can see they're just lining up, and that's it. It's on there. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can really see the action here. Okay, there we go. You can see the wheels turning. Doesn't take a lot of pressure. That spoon holds nice and smooth. Obviously, the best part of doing one of these things is that putting spools on and taking them off is really easy. You just grab a spool. As long as the width is set up right, you just take it, stick it on there. Feed your new spool on there. I can take that one off. Take this one, put the white on. Boom. A lot of my spools are the same width. A lot of them are these hatchbox type spools, but I'm probably going to put another one up here with the other frame that I have that have the narrower frame, smaller frame. I'll put that up there like that. I don't think I got the space right here to do this, and then you can just slide these things over. Slide that over, and let's find a narrow spool. There's a narrow one. So there's a narrow one. And we will put this up here like that. Get the approximate distance right about there, and then press it on. Good, then we got a narrow one, and the narrow one spins. Pretty cool, huh? Let me just back that out a little bit. And so now you got the two spools up there ready to go. And then you got the wider design here. I just think I like the wider design. The other thing I was worried about when designing this was whether or not these would fall off easily. And that's why I made these grooves really deep, to make sure that you know, they couldn't come out of the grooves accidentally. And they were harder to push off. With this one, with it being the base being a little narrower, I was worried about it not as being as stable, but they actually seem pretty stable on. Okay, there you go. Anyways, there's the two spools on the printer on my Mark II. And I bet you I could probably fit 3 of those things on there if I put them in nice and tight. That way I could have 3 different widths up there all the time to accommodate my filament. So here's my filament racks, and I do have some different varieties of widths and stuff like that. Like, say, like that flex up there, that's a really wide one. There's another really wide one, that green stuff. So if I have 3 different widths, this PLA that actually came from Prusa, that's another wide one. So if I had 3 sizes, I think I'd be able to accommodate most of the spools that I've got. Here's some footage of the filament rollers in action, speeded up 800%, just to kind of show how smoothly the filament pulls while on the rollers. Now, the one thing you might have to do is put 2 or 3 of these on your Prusa MK3 or 2 to accommodate the different filament roll widths. I have 3 or 4 common sizes that I use. The most common size that I use is this 65mm width hatch box. So, but I do have a couple of the narrow ones. I have a 43mm ones, which I think are like flex or something. They're really narrow. And so I'll have one set up just for that. Now, to make it easier to change the widths, I am going to make some spacers to put between the different filament frames, so I could quickly and easily change to the width that I need if I need to add one on there. But I decided to make some spacers to make it easier to set up the width of the frames for each different spool width. This is for a 65mm wide spool. The actual width of the spacer is 43mm. You take the width of the spool and subtract 22. That's how you get your width. So I just make up some of these for each different spool width. You can see it just slides right on a Prusa rail. You put it between your 2 frames. You squeeze your frames together. That sets the perfect width. You put your spool back up on top, and there you go. You've got the perfect width for that spool. Well, thanks for watching the video. I hope that you go to Thingaverse, download the STL files, and try printing and using these frame filament rails yourself. If you have any questions on anything, please leave a message in the comments or leave a comment on Thingaverse. Again, thanks again, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe.